Thank you very much for your patience. This is a session about what's new in CSS, introduction to CSS Grid and CSS custom properties. Before we start, you have to know that there are a lot of other new things in CSS than these two but these two topics are really interesting and can change a lot of things as we work. So that's why I want to talk about them. So I'd like to ask you that don't try to learn today everything. It's impossible. I won't talk to you about everything of these two topics. These are two very big topics, and we could talk about them for a week or so much more long. So don't try to learn everything, but try to understand. And if you don't understand anything, just ask me. And if I can, I will answer. Okay, so focus on understanding. And of course, the slides will be online. I will show you the links. And this is the online version too. That's why I had to. So I use it because I had to change the laptop. So I hope you can follow along if you want. So some words about me. My name is Tamás Hajas. I am a Drupal and web project manager. So what I'm doing here now, talking about front-end. It's easy. I'm a front-end developer too. I think. I like to say that I'm a front-end developer. So I work for Integral Vision Limited or Integral Vision Kft. That's a small agency, Drupal web agency at Budapest. We have about 20 members. And currently, we are looking for an account. So if someone wants to come to us, or you know someone, just tell him, tell her that we look for an account, and we also look for smart people anytime. Yeah, and if you want to know some more thing about me, you can find my online name card at this address, that tamás@github.io. So it's really a name card, just a picture and some links to other social profiles. So, the slides. See if you want to look at them on your laptop or you can't wait. I switch to the next one. You can find them online or you can find them online later if it's interesting. And our first topic is CSS Grid. Before we start, yeah? Yes, of course. That's it. So I wait a little bit. Wait a little bit. You can look for it. It is said https Tamás, THEMAS.gitlab.io. It's not GitHub, it's GitLab. That's the same. GitLab, sorry. So gitlab.io per CSS-grid-custom-props. That's it. So, okay, may we go? Right. Yeah, I can really recommend GitLab. It's much like GitHub, but it's another solution. It's as I know, it's an open source thing to manage these kind of things, and you can use it online too, and you can use the service for free. You can have also private projects for free at GitLab. So I like it really much, and we also use GitLab at our company. So let's go to the CSS Grid thing. So first, I'd like to ask you, how many of you use some kind of grid framework or a framework which has a grid? Is it Bootstrap or Foundation or SUSE or Singularity? So do you use any of them? Okay, some of you. Okay. How many of you learned anything about or know anything about CSS Grid? Oh, that's nice. So you can correct me if I'm wrong. I'm trusting you. But before we go to CSS Grid and the whole grid layout is based on the principles of print design. It started centuries ago, and started to design pages using different kind of grids. And CSS Grid is the first thing which is really similar to this old kind of thing. And this is really a good thing, and I will show you why. And the first I have to tell you about it, it is really good because CSS Grid is the first real layout solution in CSS. All the things we used before, tables, floats, display table, and even, forget, I know. So these are all hacks, kind of hacks, because they were not intended to use for page layouts. But the CSS Grid is the tool to create page layouts and other kind of layouts, smaller parts layouts in CSS. So before CSS Grid, we had to write a lot of code, HTML markup and CSS, just to be able to get the layout. But it's not necessary. If you use CSS Grid, it won't be necessary. Let me show you some examples, not so much. The first one is just a picture. It's from the Cloud4Com blog. This is a layout. There are two versions of it, a mobile one and the desktop one, say it to that. And the interesting thing, I think you find this thing before, that you have the content here, just in this column, but you have to have a section, maybe an image or some kind of thing, which is full with. So you have to do it. And you can do it, it's not so hard. Here's a solution from the same blog. So not too much. You can do it, but you have to, but this is a trick. You use calc and some kind of interesting thing. And also, it has a little problem. In some browsers, it needs an overflow X settings to hidden to work. So it's you can see that it's a little bit hacky. Okay, so what to do with that? This is the same thing using CSS Grid. How does it work? I won't go to too much details, but if we go back to here, you can imagine all these things, this layout, that this is a grid. First column, second column, third column. First row, second row, third row. So this is a grid, simple grid. And you can define it using CSS Grid. I just check I can change it here. Oh, I can go there. I should go here. That's it. You don't have to understand it now. The only thing you have to see, maybe it's too small, but I have a grid class here. And the first line is display grid. And that's the trick. And after that, I have some rules to define the gap and the rows and the columns. We will talk about it later. And then just set all the items to some part of the grid. Here, here, and it. These go to the middle column, and this is a forward. And it even shouldn't be so much code. It could be less code. So let us see another example. I like it really. If I can switch to the next slide. So this is a really nice layout. This is a real one. This is just a wireframe, but from a real site we worked on. It's a little bit complicated. It looks nice. It could be part of a printed design, and it can be part of a web page design, but it has some requirements. So, for example, the title can be one or more lines long. So we can know how to start it, or we can just set it to here, the teaser, because maybe it won't be 3 lines, just 2 lines. Okay. As you can see, the title overlaps the image, but the teaser under that won't do that. So one overlapping and another text part which is not overlapping. And the text should keep its layout if there's no image. So it is possible that there won't be an image, but we have to see the title and the teaser in the same layout. Yeah, interesting. If it's not enough, image is content and not a background. This is part of the content. You can set it as a background image. You may not say. And the height of the hero depends on the content length, so maybe dictated by the text or the image. So if I have a one-line title, maybe the image will be higher, so this is the end. If I have so long title, this is the end of this hero. Well, so, and yeah, just the desktop layout. So I won't show you the mobile layout, but it's have its own requirements too. So we live in a responsive world. So, how to do it? Do you have some ideas? Could you help me? So, how could we do it? What should we use? Just say. Pardon? The index, yeah, that index, 1. And? Position, what kind of position? Absolute position. Do we like absolute position? I don't like absolute position. Every time I have to do absolute positioning, I feel like, ooh, I'm dirty. It's not a good thing. Okay, yeah, you're right. So, absolute positionings and Z index. And? Will this be enough? This has to overlap. This has to be here. Yes! Margin and padding tricks. And some declaration using calc, with declaration using calc. So these are all I had to use to make it work. Or, what else we can do? You know it, I am sure. Yes! We can use CSS Grid, and it's much more easier and much more clean. Again, we have a grid. We have 3 columns and 2 lines. And without absolute positioning and things like this, we can set overlapping. So the title is 2 columns wide, the image is 2 columns wide, and the row height is automatic, and everything is fine. What you see here, I can show it live, but I really recommend to use Firefox if you deal with CSS Grid, because it has a really good CSS inspector, and Chrome will have too, but they just started to work on it. I saw a tweet yesterday about working on CSS Grid in Chrome, but Firefox have a layout inspector now in the stable version, and in the Firefox nightly, you have some other things. You can see line numbers, I will talk about them. And also we could see area names and things like that. So you can check also the Firefox nightly if you are interested. There is a layout tab in the Firefox nightly version. So I really recommend it. Okay. This is the slide I also have to talk about that. What's the big difference the previous tools, previous CSS tools and the CSS Grid in the way of thinking. All the other tools we used for layout earlier thinks in content out, and they are all one-dimensional. So everything you used before is thinking about this and this and this, and try to position these things. So they start with the content. They start with the items and try to position them somewhere on the page. And also, you can set one position, one dimension. So you work on a row or you work on a column. Flexbox is the same, or latest layout tool before CSS Grid. It's one-dimensional. The big difference is CSS Grid that is two-dimensional, so you can set something in the same time in the rows and the columns. You can position them. And also, this is the first tool which is layout in. So you won't think in the items, you will think in the layout. Just like a classic example, bookshelf. So you have a bookshelf with shelves, and you made it, and you will take the books on it. Other methods are different. Other methods, like you have a lot of books, and you put them on each other and to the right, and you try to take them in a good order. So really, really big difference. It's not content out, but layout in. Okay. So I worked really hard to make these slides for you, but I had no enough time, so I will borrow some other slides. And we will learn the basics from another presentation. That's it. Okay. So this is by Morten Hendriksen. I hope I say his name right. And this was a presentation in a WordPress event. And it's a really good one. I won't start on the first slide, but on the 41, which is where the part we're interested in starts here. Okay, let's go. So, terminology about CSS Grid. We will have container, item, line, cell, track, area, and gap. This is a lot. So I said to you, don't try to remember everything today, but try to understand it. Grid container. An element containing a grid defined by setting display grid. This is the first. So if you want to create a container with a grid, you have to use display grid, like display flex, display block, display inline, and so on. This is really easy, display grid. Okay, grid items. Element that is a direct descendant, a direct child of the grid container. This is a grid item. So you can set the position only the direct childs of the grid container. In this example, header, H1, main, aside, footer, and so on. The important thing is the direct child. Okay, grid line. It's an important one. We have horizontal lines and vertical lines. These are the borders of the columns and the rows, which are separating the grid into sections. So these are the grid lines. They are really important in setting a grid layout. And starts, depending on the language, from the left to right. This is the first, second, third, and so on. First, second, and that's it. But it depends on the language and the direction you set in your HTML. Okay. You can reference the grid lines by number, as I showed you, starting at the ending with the outer borders of the grid. So you can see what I said. This is the easiest way. These are just numbers. You can count them. You have 6 lines in each row and in each columns. Okay. A grid cell is an intersection between a grid row and a grid column, effectively the same as the table cell, just like the table cell. So you have lines, and between the horizontal and vertical lines, you have the grid cells. A grid area, regular between 4 specified grid lines. Grid areas can cover 1 or more cells. So one cell is a grid area, but a grid area can be more than one cell. It's got 2, 3, 4, anyhow. It's really important. It's always a rectangle shape. So currently, you can't define the grid area, example, like a shape like this. Maybe in the future, but it's not possible now. A grid track. Maybe you won't meet too much with this word, but the specification tells about it. A grid track is a space between two or more lines, and there are row tracks and column tracks. So the common name of the columns and the rows are track, horizontal and vertical. Grid gap, new thing, we didn't talk about it. This is an empty space between grid tracks. This is the blue ones, and you commonly call they commonly call the gutters. So you will find them gutters. Grid track can be 0 pixels wide or anything you need. And it's really important that grid gaps, you have grid gaps just between cells. You won't have gaps at the borders, nowhere, just inside the grid. Okay, so how grid works in a nutshell. Define a grid, place items within the grid, and you will be happy. And there comes peace, we hope. Or more than things. So, see how to do it. So, this is a site layout, this is a mobile one, nothing interesting here. We have sections just below each other. Okay, so the outermost part is a div with a class site. This will be our container, and how we do it? It's easy. Display grid. As we said, this creates a container. That's it. That's all. We have a grid container now. Easy. So, how to define columns and rows? Using grid template columns and grid template rows. These grid lines takes a list of lengths of values, em, pix, percent, fr, etc., denoting the distance between each line. So we can use to set columns and rows with any length value you know. And I'm sure you know em, pix, percent, but maybe you don't know about fr. This is fraction, you will see. This is one fraction of the remaining space. Sorry. So I think there will be better slides about this. So this is a new one. This came with the grid specification. This means fraction, and we will see how to use it. So that's it. This is the fr. So you can set 3 columns this way. For example, this is just one way. You can set it a lot of ways, where you define 2 fr, 1 fr, 1 fr. That's the whole is 4 frs. So the remaining space, the whole space in the container, is divided to 4 fractions, and you will have 2 columns which 1 fraction wide and another column which is 2 fraction wide. Is it okay? So you can use another kind of units. If you use, for example, 100 pixel and 1 fr and 1 fr, then the browser first will set that 100 pixel wide column, and then it divides the remaining space. And that will be 1 fr and 1 fr. The remaining space will be divided, always. Okay, we can do it with rows too. We can use also the auto keyword, which means that the height will set by the content length. We can use the auto keyword also in columns. So we can use the auto keyword, and you can see also 1 fr, 1 fraction, and 3 fractions. This means the remaining space is also divided to 4 and multiplied for once and three times. So we have a grid now. We have a container by display grid. We have columns by grid template columns, 2FR, 1FR, 1FR, and we have 3 rows, and outer height, and the 1FR and the 3FR height rows. Let's go on. Let's see how the time. Okay. So that's it. Item placement. If you don't exactly say where you want to place your items, they will be placed automatically, populated from the top left to the bottom right based on the HTML source order. So every direct child in the container will be placed automatically, just like they are in the HTML from the top left, first, second, third, to the bottom right, fourth, fifth, and so on. So if you don't need, you don't have to place them. They will be placed automatically. It can be enough if you create just a pattern. So you don't work in a page layout, but for example, a photo gallery. You won't need to place every item directly. Okay, that's it. Okay. So, but if you want to place them, you have a lot of options. And this is the most common, I think, or the most easy. This is grid column and grid row. These are applied to grid items, defines the starts and the end grid lines for columns and rows. So that's why I said lines are important. When you place items on the grid this way, you won't say that I want it on the first column, on the second, or want it from the first column to the third, or from the first row to the third, but you say, I want it from the first line to the third. That's the same. And just say, I want this item from the first line to the third, which means how many columns? 2 columns, yeah. Also, I want it from the second line in the row to the fourth, which means also how many rows? 2, starting from the second row. We'll see it, I hope. Yeah? Yes, yes. And you don't have to say all the time every line number. So if you want an item to be just 1 track wide or 1 track height, that's enough to say the start position. So if you say grid column first, it will be in the first column and it will be 1 column wide. That's enough. That's it. You can see an example, as I said. So starts in column line 2 and ends in column line 4. That's it. And we didn't say anything about the rows, so it's automatic placed in the first row. But it's 2 columns wide. That's the masthead. So you always have to define just it's really need, and everything else is automatically set for you. There are a lot of defaults, and I think these are smart defaults. So if you don't have a complicated layout, it can work for you without positioning every item directly. Sorry. Yeah, we're waiting. Work, please. Yes, that's it. So we can create a layout this way. If it's automatic layout not the thing we want, just every item, every direct child has to be set. We have to set the grid column and grid row. And you can position everything in the container. I think it's easy. If you get the logic. Maybe if you have 12 columns, like in Bootstrap, it can be harder to count the lines. But I'm not sure you need really 12 columns. This layer doesn't need 12 columns. There can be a situation where you need it, but I'm not sure. we can forget about the typical 12 columns layouts. We can create layouts for content, and we can make it much easy to understand because we have only the things we need. You can say you're a designer. You don't need 12 columns. So, some things about. Looks promising, but remembering what lines to target seems tricky, especially when the site is responsive. Just as I said. So, how about it? That's it. You can create a responsive site, of course, using Grid. This is an example from the presentation. That's a responsive. That's a one-column layout on mobile, a two-column layout on a tablet or a wider screen, and a three-column layout on a desktop screen. It's not so hard. It's possible using Grid. So you can change the settings using in media queries. You can change the line, the columns. So you can change the grid layout if you want, or you can change just the positioning them. What you like, you can do this way or the other way. Okay, so just back for a moment. So this is possible. So, and you just don't need Grid, and you don't need anything for mobile layout. You create a markup which good for mobile, which is semantic, which is meaningful. You create an order. And from going from mobile to wider screens, you can create your layout. You can define a layout, and you can say that this is a two-column layout. But this can be a 12-column layout if you want. It's possible. And you will say that this is 6-column wide and this is 6-column wide too. You don't have to, as you want. So, but you can use the same layout and change the item positioning, or you can change the layout. Which you prefer? So, next possible thing, grid template areas. We were talking about these areas. Apply to grid container. So we went back to the container. Uses a text-based grid map to apply grid area names to individual cells. It's really funny and really cool. So you can create a layout and name the areas this way. So we created a 3-column layout and 3 rows, and we can give names to these areas, just writing them in the same layout as the web page layout. So if I write the grid template areas title, this will create a column for me called title. This is Sinten title. This is title 2. I used the Hungarian word, sorry. Sinten 2. So title, title, title. This means this whole thing is one area. This whole thing is a title area. And also, main area just one grid cell, but the header areas 2 cells. As you remember, we said that area can be 1 or more cells. Also, sidebar, footer, main. Oh, sorry. So main area is not 1 cell, but 2 cells, but this is vertically. So that's it. So 1 area, 2, 3, 4, 5 areas, as they is written here. And we can use these names to place our items. That's why this is important. So this is specifies what the grid area the element is placed within. So grid area is for the grid items. Instead of saying from first line to 3 and in the columns and also at the rows, we just use the area name. And we have to use square brackets to place items to areas. So that's it. You can do it this way. This is another way to make the same thing. So we have areas, and we say master head have to go to the header area, page title have to go to the title area, and so on. This is also possible. And as I said, Firefox nightly, and later Firefox will have the tool to display the area names. So you define a grid, you define the area names, and you can see in the inspector and on the page also the area names. It's really cool. I'm really sorry I can't show it for you. Here it is. I'm sorry. Okay, so responsive design in this year. That's it. For example, so as I mentioned, I have a default layout, and then I change this layout in the media query. This is the one of the ways I mentioned earlier to create responsive sites. Oh, and please remember that we changed the grid settings in the media query. In the second part of the presentation, it will be interesting too, from another aspect. So that's it. No grid, 2-column grid, 2-column grid, 3-column grid, as you mentioned earlier. Okay, we have time. And this is the layout for the site. Okay, nested grids. So grids are not inherited by child elements. Instead, we can create nested grids. So you can create a grid for your page layout, and inside that page layout, you can create another grid layout for your hero, just like my example at the start of the presentation. But they are not inherited. There are works to make it possible to inherit grid layout, but it doesn't work currently, and it's really complicated things. But you can use just nested grids, and it's really cool. Okay, how about other browsers? Ask your boss, your client, and so on, and you, maybe you too. How about other browsers? So, Grid is supported in all modern browsers, or something like that. But the truth is that supported in Firefox, Chrome, Safari, Opera, that's the cool browsers. But everyone knows about IE and Edge. Microsoft. We love Microsoft. You have to love Microsoft. Do you know who started to work on the CSS Grid? Microsoft, yeah, for the IE10. The first specification was set by Microsoft, and the old version of grid specification works in the old IE, IE10, IE11, and also in Edge. That's the problem for us now, because they work with the old specification, but the specification changed. But we can we always have a workaround. We can do it again now. So, and also Edge currently supports the new specification behind the flag. So you can set Edge to work with the new specification. So that's in the future, in the soon future, Edge also will support. Yeah, great, thank you. So we have to, yeah, that's an interesting thing. I will show you two things about it. So, yeah, it still looks too soon, as you said. So one thing from Jen Simmons, just read it. And while you read it, so New York Times shipped grid on production, said Jen Simmons. Jen Simmons is one of the early adopters and advocates of the CSS Grid. So I can believe her. But, so what to say to your client? I think, as always with other things which are new, which are better, which is easier to develop, we have to educate our boss and our clients. We can talk about that, okay, so this is a new thing. This is supported in the most of the browsers. So we can work with it. We can work with it quicker, which means we can work with it cheaper. And you have to decide, and you have to see how many % of your users uses Internet Explorer, for example. Do you really need that? So if they really need them, they have to find the business value, and if they have a business value, you can take that more amount of work which is needed to support these browsers. But it's not just about CSS Grid, it's about everything. It's about to look ahead and then looking back. This is the way of thinking. So it's anything which is new. So yeah, well, we need a good support, but we can't stop just because of one browser from the many. We can stop if our clients, all the people who works with the clients uses Internet Explorer. You won't use CSS Grid. But if it's not the case, you can educate them. You can talk about them. You can find the real business value. And also we have tools just. So we were talking about this. So what to do? This is also a CSS tool. Who knows about supports? This row 1. So let's talk about it. The add supports rule is supported every browser which supports CSS Grid, and maybe some more. So this is a feature query. I just forgot the name, but this is written here. So using this feature query, you can test grid support in the current browser. So you can write your CSS Grid rules inside a supports feature query. So every browser which understands this feature query and supports display grid, we use the grid. And other browsers who doesn't understand our supports or doesn't support the display grid property, they won't use the rules you set inside the feature query. This is a solution, but it's better to use the grid area instead, because as I mentioned, EA and Edge thinks they support the CSS Grid, but they support the all specification. So you should use another kind of property from the CSS Grid specification. For example, grid area auto, because it is not supported all browsers, so they won't read anything inside the feature query. And also, so this means more work. So if you have to support EE11 or Edge, and also want to use the CS Grid, you have to write your rules for those older browsers. But most of these layout properties will be overwritten by CSS Grid. So you just should use the support query to not to let EE to lie about support. Because if you define display block, for example, and after the display grid will override display block. Also override floats and all table methods and all these things. So that's the way. I can't say you will be able to do it every time, but you should to try that. You should to try to educate your clients, because we are, as I think, and so it's really as important thing, we are not just to do the things our clients say to us. We are experts. We are hired because we are experts, and we don't have to do the things but what the client asks for. We have to do the thing the client needs. And these two things can be different. So we have to know, we have to understand the business needs of the clients and provide the best solution, because we know what is the best solution for them. We have to understand their business goals and find the best solution to those goals. That's it. And we can talk about it. We are partners. That's a good way of work if we are partners with our clients, I think. So let's go to the back to the slides. Okay. Yeah, you may say that maybe it won't look the same in all browsers. That's also, we can hear that also a lot of times. So, what about responsive design? A site in a mobile device won't look the same as on the desktop device. Everyone knows it. So, forcing sites to look the same across all browsers is just a bad habit. Sites don't have to look the same in all devices. Don't have it. That's all. So, just like responsive design, as you see. Okay. So if we have a mobile first layout, it will work every screen. Maybe it won't be so fancy, but maybe it don't have to be so fancy in every browser. Okay, this is about progressive and his enhancement. We won't go in details. Okay, so how to use CSS Grid? Build accessible mobile first layout without grid. Use mobile first layout as a fallback for all browsers, or just create a layout just somehow similar. Use supports to detect grid support, and change the layout in the breakpoint if you need, and that's it. Okay, we don't need it. We go back to my slides. That's okay. So I think that's all I have to say about today grid layouts. As I mentioned, there are a lot of more things in CSS Grid specification, and not in the specification. Luckily, we have a lot of really good tutorials on the net. I can recommend learnCSSGrid.com for you, for example. That's a really good tutorial, and starts from the basics. And in one page, if you have enough time, you can read through, and you will learn much more about it, and you can use it as a reference. But CSS Tricks also have a reference about CSS Grid. You can read the specifications. You can find a lot of videos on YouTube about CSS Grid. So there are more things to learn about it. You can learn about, for example, repeating rows and columns automatically, setting minimum and maximum size of grids, so which makes really easy to create layouts automatically. So you should read about them, and I hope you will enjoy to use CSS Grid, because it's really a great tool. As we saw and we see in this title, this is really changes everything about layouts, web layouts. So do you have any questions about Grid now? Okay. You don't have questions, or you just, oh, yes? One more time, please, sorry. No, CSS Grid is a framework. So you don't have to have a framework. So if you see a framework which says, this is my framework built on CSS Grid, don't believe it. CSS Grid is the framework. You don't need any framework. Yes, you can create, for example, mixins and SAS to make your work easier. You may find some things to make automatism, but the framework is the CSS Grid. So you don't need frameworks. Yeah? Yeah. What was the question? Sorry. So, removing items, yeah?
Yeah, so if you put the CMS content,
Yeah?
a bunch of paragraphs into grid layout, and the content manager removes the paragraph, how do you handle that?
Yeah, so it depends on how did you build your layout. So if you have a layout which where every item is placed directly, maybe it can be a problem. But it depends on what do you want to see in your layout. So if you want to see a banner in the sidebar, and the content removes it, and there will be an empty space, it may be a problem. But it depends on the situation. Or you build a layout which just places items automatically, then there won't be an empty space because there will be something else there, which can be a problem if in the place of the banner will be your content. That's a problem. So that's the thing you have to think about. Yeah, when you use a CMS, you have to think about these things. But anything, you can do anything else. You can use any as rules. These These are the things you always have to think about. What happens if the editor just changes something? For example, most of the time we don't have to use our clients to use the block layout in Drupal because they can just break everything. We find solutions to place items to here and there, but not the block layout, because we can say you can edit this block, but you can change other blocks, for example. That's it. Other question about CSS Grid layout?